Guys, welcome back, and today we'll be talking about classes and objects in Java. This is possibly going to be the most important topic we'll be covering in this crash course video. So last time we learned about how to write if statements and how to write 3 different kinds of loops. If you don't know how to do any of those things, then please check out my previous videos. So in my first video, I mentioned that Java is an object-oriented programming language. Essentially, how we're going to describe this is that it's a programming language that uses the idea of classes and objects. And throughout this video, we're going to try to explain what a class is and what is an object. So what is a class? Anytime we started a new Java file, we would always call it something generic, like file 1 or exercise 1, exercise 2. And I said that class is like a container where you would write all of your code. And this all holds true, except we're going to be naming the class as something a little more meaningful to give it its intended functionality. So class, you could think of it as like a blueprint or a template. So in this example, I'll be saying that maybe we have a bag template, for example, like this image that we have here. And what is an object then? In computer science, we say an object is a specific instance of the class. And in terms of our bag example, what we could say is if we have a class template, if we have a bag template, then we can create an actual bag from it. We can create a specific instance of a bag. So in this case, we have a Let's Avocado bag right here. And for one class or one template, we can create multiple objects. So right here, we have one bag template, and we can create multiple different kinds of bags right here. So the relationship between classes and objects is that a class provides properties and functions, like potential properties and functions that could be used in order to create the behaviors of an object. So in this case, we define properties of a bag template. What kind of properties would a bag have? And then the object would be the actual bag that uses those characteristics. So in another example, we can say you can't create a car object from a bag class or a bag template because cars and bags just don't have any similar characteristics or behaviors. So what we're going to be doing throughout this video is try to create a bag class and see how we can instantiate a bag object for it. And I'll go over what instantiating also means later on in this video. So before we get started with creating the actual class, we need to talk about what are the different properties or a characteristic of a bag. So here are some 4 things that I listed out here. Perhaps we care about the color of the bag. We care about what items it stores and how many items does it store. And we might care about brand names as well. So now let's create a bag class with these characteristics. So the first thing we need to do is, as we do with any other Java class files, is that we need to declare the class. So we here have public class bag, which is pretty familiar syntax that we've seen so far. We have the opening curly braces, and I didn't show you the full code just yet, but there's going to be an ending curly brace later on in this code. So right after you declare your bag class, the next thing that you have to do is declare your global variables, and these global variables are special because they're called fields. And so how I would define fields in Java is that fields are global variables in a class that defines the properties of that class. So for example, in this case, this is a bag template. And if you look at these 4 variable names, these are actually the same exact characteristics that we talked about in the previous slide right here. So here we have the color of the bag, we have the number of items we can store in the bag, and we have a list of items that we want to store in the bag, and the brand name of that bag, the potential brand names. So what I want you to notice is that we actually don't initialize just yet. All we do is that we declare it in the beginning, and then we'll initialize later on in this code. And another thing to notice about fields is that we always want to keep them private. And this is just for security purposes. So if you were to be in a completely different class file and you were to manipulate the value of, for example, color, then that's actually really bad coding practice, because that means that you can accidentally change something when you did not want that to happen, and there could be errors in your code. And so the next thing that we're going to talk about is creating a constructor for the class. So here, what is a constructor per se? So a constructor is actually a public method that is used to actually create the bag object. So when you are trying to create that object in your main method, for example, that's what you're going to be using. So here what we do in the constructor method is that we were going to be initializing our fields. So in this case, I'm just going to hard code majority of it here. So here inside I have the color, I'm just going to set it to brown by default. And the number of items it can hold is 10. And what I do is, this is just like creating an empty list. You don't really have to understand the syntax. And then we have that I just wanted to set the default brand name to be a Louis Vuitton. And what I want you to notice about a constructor is that for the majority, we're going to say that it is public. And the other thing is that the name of the method is the same as the name of the class, which is the same as the name of the file. So that is always going to be true for the constructor. Other things to notice is that you do not provide a return type for this method. Now, there's something called overloading a method. And what that means is that if you have methods of the same name, but you're providing different arguments for it, then Java is going to think, oh, they're completely two different methods. So you can actually overload methods, meaning that you can have a method of the same name but with different arguments that way. So what I'm doing is that I'm actually creating two constructors. So one is the default constructor. So anytime I use this without any arguments, then I am just going to have a brown Louis Vuitton bag. However, if I have a constructor here where I'm taking in arguments, this means that I can take in a color, I can take in the number of items, and the brand name. The reason why I know that is because that's how I coded it. I did not have to necessarily set those values, but I just did. And so here I'm initializing my field. So color is going to be equal to whatever this C is, and the etc. And items is the same, where I just create an empty list, but we don't really need to care about that. And so I have mentioned that here in our fields that they're all private. So if they're private and you're in a completely different class file, how do we access these values? How can we even change these values? So there's something called getters and or accessors that we can use in order to access those field values. And this is just, these methods need to be set in place so that we know that the programmers are intentionally trying to access those fields values. So what we have here is that we have get color, get items, get num items, and get brand name. And what you can kind of deduce from these method names is that they're probably going to be returning the value of color, the list of items, number of items, and brand name respectively. And so what I want you to notice is that majority of all of them are going to be public. So they're all public in this case. So when we look at this first example for get color, we are going to be returning string because I declared my color variable to be a string. And I basically do the same exact thing. So get items, so this is a return type for a list of strings, and I return items, which is just the name of the variable. And then get num items, I know that this is the num items is going to be declared as an integer, and that's what I want to return. So that's why my return type is an integer, and I return the variable num items. So it's pretty self-explanatory here as long as you understand how Java methods work. Another thing to notice is that none of these methods are static, and we'll go over why they're not static in later part of the video. And now we have something called setters or manipulators. So originally I had mentioned that we want to access field values, but we also want to change them most likely. So setters and manipulators are a set of methods that you can use to reassign new value to the fields. So in this case, what I want you to notice is that they're once again all public. But our return type is going to be void, meaning that we're not going to return anything. All we're doing is we're changing the value of our fields. So here, for example, with our set color, we can already tell that we are going to change the value of our color variable. So here we have to take in a variable argument that is of type string because color is a string global variable. And so what we're doing is we're reinitializing our color variable to be this new value C. And you can kind of see the same pattern with the other guys right here. It's just that the arguments data type is going to be dependent on the data type of the fields. So these are some additional methods that I have provided, and they're getting more to the data structure zone, so you don't really have to understand how these work, but if you do want to end up trying using these guys, then they are there. They're going to be in my GitHub repo, and you can kind of check them out later. So this is just what we went over. Some of the things that we notice is that all of the fields are most likely going to be private, and majority of the methods are going to be public, and majority of the methods in a class will not be static, especially if you want an object to be able to access that method. But we'll go over more of that